What happens when a person charged with enforcing a neighborhood's rules decides she is above the law and ends up cutting the lock on a special unit police jeep? This is the story of how one HOA leader's obsession spun out of control, becoming a scandal with flashing lights and charges she never imagined. Imagine this. You have just invested your savings, your sweat, and your patience into buying a house you believed would finally give you peace. A place where you could breathe after years of working late and chasing criminals through alleys and back roads. That is exactly what Detective Darius Hale felt when he arrived at the quiet community of Cypress Hill Commons in San Antonio, Texas. He was not looking for trouble. He did not want drama. He simply wanted a quiet place to park his Jeep, sit on his porch, and let the world keep moving without him for once. But peace is fragile, and in this neighborhood it was protected, or perhaps strangled, by one woman's iron grip on the rules. Her name was Marjorie Crow. At first glance, she was a retiree with too much free time, walking around with a notebook as if she ran City Hall. But to the people who lived on Cypress Hill Drive, she was the self-appointed enforcer of the Homeowners Association. Where others saw neighbors, she saw violations. Where others saw harmless quirks, she saw threats to property values. She made it her mission to control everything, from the height of the grass to the color of the curtains in the windows. The first time Darius met her, he was carrying boxes from his Jeep into the house. She approached in khaki pants and a visor, holding her notebook like a badge. "You know," she said, looking at his driveway, "we try to maintain a certain standard here. Most people park their cars inside the garage." Darius, soaked in sweat and balancing a box of kitchen utensils, gave her a polite smile. "I'll keep that in mind." He did not want to fight, not on his first day of moving in. But Marjorie did not move. She pointed at the Jeep with a sharp tone. "And that, what's with the big lock on the wheel? It looks like a problem vehicle." Darius set the box on the ground and looked at her directly. "It's called security," he answered. "It helps keep my car from being stolen." Marjorie pressed her lips together and wrote something in her notebook. "Well, things don't get stolen around here," she said. "This is a safe community." Darius did not argue. He simply picked up the box again, walked past her, and went inside. But the tone had already been set. She was far from finished. In the days that followed, Darius noticed her watching him when he left for his morning run. She was pruning roses, watching when he returned from a night shift, and the blinds of her house moved when he parked the Jeep. Sometimes she walked nearby, shaking her head as if something displeased her. Neighbors warned him, "That's just Marjorie. She likes to control everything." What they did not say out loud was that she seemed to have a special interest in Darius, an interest that went beyond one night. While Darius grilled in his backyard, his next-door neighbor, Victor Rourke, leaned over the fence. "You've already got her attention," Victor said with a nervous laugh. "Be careful with that Jeep. She once called a tow truck for a guy's van that was in his own driveway." Darius raised an eyebrow. "Really? That's ridiculous." "Yeah," Victor shrugged. "She thinks she's saving the neighborhood." Darius shook his head as he flipped a burger. "She's gonna learn she's messing with the wrong person." But here is the twist. Darius was not the type who looked for fights. He had spent years staying calm, working undercover in dangerous situations, and resolving conflicts before they exploded. He knew patience could be a weapon, but sometimes patience is mistaken for weakness. And Marjorie Crow was about to cross a line that could not be ignored, because to her, that Jeep was not just a car, it was a target. She saw the lock as a stain on her perfect community, something that had to be erased. What she did not know, what she could not imagine, was that the Jeep was more than steel and rubber. It was law enforcement equipment tied to investigations that went far beyond the boundaries of Cypress Hill Commons. Marjorie believed she was protecting her community. Darius knew she was about to put something much larger in her sights. And when their paths crossed, the neighbors would soon realize that a small act of arrogance could turn into headlines, handcuffs, and lessons no one would forget. This was not just a clash of personalities. It was the beginning of a storm that would shake the entire neighborhood. The tension between Darius Hale and Marjorie Crow did not stay on a low simmer for long. It boiled. What began with furtive glances and scribbles in a notebook soon became the first real confrontation, and it happened in broad daylight, in full view of neighbors who pretended not to care while secretly watching from their porches and windows. Darius had just finished a night shift. He pulled into his driveway, the Jeep's tires crunching against the gravel edge. As always, the bright yellow steering wheel lock shone from inside the windshield like a warning signal. He shut off the engine, hung his duffel bag over his shoulder, and started walking toward the front door. That was when he heard her. "Mr. Hale." Her voice cut across the street like a whistle. Darius turned, already bracing himself. Marjorie Crow marched across the street with her visor tilted down, notebook in one hand and a rolled-up HOA bulletin in the other. "Yes?" Darius asked calmly. Marjorie stopped at the edge of his driveway, arms crossed. "We've talked before about parking your car. The garage is empty, and yet you keep leaving this Jeep outside. That violates Section 4B of our community guidelines." Darius exhaled slowly. "I told you I work late. It's easier to park here than pull into the garage every night. And my garage isn't exactly empty. I still have boxes stacked while I finish moving in." Marjorie's eyes went to the Jeep and the lock. "It's an eyesore. It makes the whole street look like we live in a high-crime area." Darius set the duffel bag on the porch and turned to face her fully. His voice was calm, but there was a steel edge beneath it. "With all due respect, Mrs. Crow, it's my vehicle. I'll secure it the way I see fit." The exchange caught the attention of Gloria Lang, who lived 2 houses down. She watered her plants while listening, though her head never moved an inch. From behind the curtains across the street, a child's face appeared, eyes wide as saucers before ducking quickly out of sight. Marjorie was not bothered. She straightened her notebook as if it granted her authority. This community maintains certain standards. You knew that when you bought your house. If you can't follow the rules, maybe you'd be happier somewhere else. Darius let out a short, dry, humorless laugh. "I've spent years in law enforcement. I'm not going to move just because you don't like how my car looks in my driveway." That was when Victor Rourke, the neighbor who had warned Darius, stepped out onto his porch. "Marjorie, maybe give the guy a break. He just moved in. He hasn't done any harm." Marjorie shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass. "Victor, this doesn't concern you." Victor raised his hands. "It concerns all of us when you walk around the street like you're the sheriff. He's not hurting anyone." The confrontation intensified. Marjorie wrote furiously in her notebook, muttering about fines and violations. Darius shook his head and picked up his bag. He was not going to feed the fire any further, not that day. But Marjorie was not finished. The next morning, Darius found a printed letter taped to his door. In bold letters it read, "Notice of violation. Vehicle improperly stored in driveway. Steering wheel lock not in compliance with community standards. Immediate action required." Beneath it was the threat of a fine. Darius crumpled the paper in his fist. Later that day, he walked straight to Marjorie's house. She opened the door with an arrogant smile, clearly expecting him. "Good morning," Darius said, holding up the crumpled notice. "You left this on my door." "That's right," Marjorie answered. "And there will be more if you don't comply. I have the full backing of the HOA board." Darius stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Let me make something clear. That Jeep is not just a car. It's tied to my work. If you mess with it, you mess with more than me." Marjorie's smile faltered, but pride is stubborn, and hers was stronger than steel. "Rules are rules," she said sharply before closing the door in his face. Back on the street, Darius clenched his jaw. He had seen criminals bluff, liars weave stories, and bullies try to puff out their chests, but Marjorie Crow was in a category of her own. A woman convinced she was untouchable because she hid behind regulations and fine print. What Darius did not realize yet was that Marjorie was already plotting her next move. She was not satisfied with warnings. She wanted action. She wanted the Jeep gone, and soon she would take matters into her own hands. But her obsession was not only about rules, it was about control. And control, when taken too far, always breaks. The letter on Darius Hale's door was only the beginning for Marjorie Crow. Filing a violation or issuing a fine was not enough. She wanted to make an example of him. In her mind, Darius represented everything wrong with the new residents. Too independent, too defiant, too unwilling to bow to her idea of order. And once Marjorie fixed her sights on you, there was no getting her off. In the following days, Darius noticed a change. Neighbors who used to greet him politely now avoided looking at him. Some crossed the street rather than walk past his driveway. Rumors spread in whispers claiming he was reckless, that his Jeep was abandoned, that maybe he was not even who he said he was. Darius could feel Marjorie's fingerprints on every story. She was not only attacking him in person, she was poisoning the air around him. One afternoon, while Darius unloaded groceries, Victor Rourke approached with a tense expression. "Look, Darius," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something. Marjorie has been going around the board trying to get votes to escalate your case." Darius frowned as he set a bag on the Jeep's hood. "Escalate how?" Victor rubbed the back of his neck. "She wants the HOA to classify your Jeep as a blight on community standards. If she gets enough support, she can push for forced removal. She's citing rules I didn't even know existed." "Really?" Darius said. "You're kidding." "I wish I was," Victor answered. "She's telling people your Jeep makes the neighborhood look dangerous. Some of them believe her. They don't want trouble, so they just nod." Darius leaned against his Jeep, arms crossed. "Dangerous. It's a vehicle, not a threat." Victor gave him a sympathetic look. "You know how it works. If she repeats it enough, people start thinking it's true." Darius clenched his jaw. He had dealt with gang leaders, drug traffickers, and career criminals who knew how to manipulate fear. Marjorie was no different, only armed with a rule book instead of a gun. Days later, the HOA meeting confirmed Victor's warning. Darius attended, sitting in the back of the small community hall. Marjorie stood at the front with papers stacked neatly on the podium. Her voice was firm, confident. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "our community prides itself on maintaining a standard. We have worked hard to create a safe, clean environment for our families. But recently, we have faced challenges. A certain resident has decided to ignore these standards. His vehicle, parked in plain sight with a lock on the steering wheel, creates an impression none of us wants associated with Cypress Hill Commons." Several eyes turned toward Darius, who remained silent, watching. Marjorie continued, "We cannot allow one person's indifference to diminish the value of our homes. That is why I propose we take stricter measures. If voluntary compliance is not possible, then removal is our only option." At that moment, Darius stood. "With all due respect," he said in a calm but firm voice, "you are misrepresenting the situation. My Jeep is not abandoned. It is in use and the lock is there because of the work I do. I have lived here less than 2 months, and already you are trying to push me out." Marjorie gave him a thin smile. "Mr. Hale, this is not personal. It is about rules. If you cannot follow them, maybe this community is not the right place for you." Darius stared at her without blinking. "Or maybe the problem is not the rules. Maybe the problem is how you are twisting them." A murmur ran through the room. For a moment, Marjorie's composure cracked, but she quickly recovered, striking the gavel against the podium. "We will vote on the motion next week. Until then, the fines will continue." After the meeting, Darius stepped out into the warm Texas evening. Victor caught up with him. "She's not going to let this go, man. She's got it in her head that she's saving the neighborhood." Darius shook his head. "Saving it from what? From a car with a lock?" Victor shrugged. "Doesn't matter. She has influence. People go along because they don't want to be her next target." Darius looked back toward the hall where Marjorie was laughing with other board members. "She's pushing too hard," he said quietly. "People like her always do. And when they cross the line, there's no going back." What Darius did not realize was that Marjorie was already preparing her plan to cross that line. She had the bolt cutters ready, the tow company on speed dial, and a plan to prove, at least in her own mind, that she was in control. But control based on fear is fragile, and Marjorie was about to discover how quickly it can break. One morning, the heat was already rising over Cypress Hill Commons, the kind of Texas heat that sticks to the skin. Most residents were inside drinking coffee or cutting the grass early before the day became unbearable. Darius Hale was at the station finishing paperwork from a long week of undercover work. That was when Marjorie Crow made her move. She had been practicing this moment all week in her garage. A pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters leaned against the wall, bought at a hardware store 3 towns away so no one local would ask questions. Marjorie told herself she was not doing anything wrong. She was simply protecting the community. That phrase had become her shield, justifying everything. She put on gloves, adjusted her visor, and marched into the street. The Jeep sat quietly in Darius's driveway, its gray paint gleaming in the sun, the steering wheel lock glaring through the windshield like a stubborn challenge. Marjorie muttered to herself, "Complete eyesore. Absolute eyesore." She raised the bolt cutters, placed them over the bright yellow lock, and pressed with all her weight. Snap! The sound rang out louder than she expected. A clean cut. The lock fell to the ground with a dull thud. "Finally," she whispered, satisfied. She opened the driver's door, slid into the seat, ignoring the faint smell of leather and the subtle traces of something official she could not identify. Extra wires near the dashboard, a small radio mounted under the console. She did not care. All that mattered was the victory. Within minutes, a tow truck pulled up, its diesel engine rumbling. Marjorie had called ahead, insisting it was an abandoned vehicle. The driver, a middle-aged man with a sunburned neck named Rick Hale, stepped out. "This the car?" he asked, looking at the Jeep. "Yes," Marjorie answered firmly. "It doesn't belong here. It violates HOA regulations." Rick scratched his head. "Looks like it's in good shape. Belongs to somebody." Marjorie shot back. "It's a violation. Do your job." Rick hesitated, but money is money. He pulled the chains, hooked the Jeep, and winched it onto the flatbed. As the Jeep tilted upward, several neighbors came out onto their porches. Gloria Lang exclaimed, hand covering her open mouth. Victor Rourke muttered, "Oh no, she didn't." Gloria shouted, "Marjorie, what are you doing? That's Darius's car." Marjorie did not flinch. "This isn't about him, Gloria. It's about the rules. If we let one person get away with it, soon everyone will think they can do whatever they want." Victor shook his head as he approached. "You're going too far. You can't just cut someone's lock and take their car." Marjorie looked at him, her voice sharp. "If you're not willing to defend this community, then get out of my way." The Jeep was already fully loaded on the truck. Rick secured the chains, uncomfortable. "Where do you want me to take it?" he asked. Marjorie waved dismissively. "Take it to the impound lot. I'll handle the paperwork." As the truck pulled away, Darius's Jeep disappearing around the corner, the chains clanking in the distance, Marjorie dusted her hands as if she had just completed a community service project. "That's how you maintain order," she murmured proudly, turning back toward her house. But not everyone shared her pride. Gloria whispered to Victor, "She's out of control. Darius is going to lose it when he finds out." Victor shook his head, his voice low. "It's worse than that. He's not the kind of person you mess with. And that Jeep, I don't think she has any idea what she just messed with." Hours later, when Darius returned home, the empty driveway stopped him cold. He stood still for a moment, staring at the bare patch of concrete. His Jeep was gone. The steering wheel lock he always used was gone too. His stomach tightened. He knew instantly this was not a mistake. Someone had touched his vehicle. He dropped his duffel bag and crossed the street to Marjorie's house. He knocked hard. The door swung open, and there she stood with an arrogant smile, arms crossed. "Looking for something?" she asked. Darius's voice was low, firm, dangerous. "Where is my Jeep?" "I had it towed," Marjorie said without hesitation. "You've been warned many times. Maybe now you'll listen." Darius leaned toward her, his eyes locked on hers. "You had no right. That Jeep is not just my car. It's part of my work. Do you understand what you've done?" Marjorie scoffed. "Work, community, whatever you want to use to justify it here, the rules come first." For a long second, Darius only looked at her. He wanted to unleash the full weight of his fury, but years on the job had taught him self-control. He straightened, his voice cold. "You've crossed the line." He turned and walked away. But Marjorie could not resist one last jab. "No, Mr. Hale, you did." Victor, watching from his porch, whispered under his breath, "She just lit a fire she can't put out." But Marjorie's pride blinded her. She believed she had won. In reality, she had just triggered a chain reaction that would bring police patrols, flashing lights, and consequences far bigger than HOA fines. When Darius Hale's Jeep was towed, the impact hit him like a punch to the chest. He had lost vehicles before, seized in undercover operations, burned in ambushes, even riddled with bullets on missions. But this was not the street. This was not the job. This was his own driveway, his own home. And someone who thought she was above everything had crossed a line she did not even understand. The first thing Darius did was drive straight to the impound lot. He took his secondary car, an ordinary black sedan, through the warm afternoon traffic until he reached the lot on the outskirts of San Antonio. He walked into the small office where a young employee sat behind bulletproof glass, chewing gum and scrolling on her phone. "I'm here for a gray four-door Jeep towed this morning from Cypress Hill Commons," Darius said, sliding his identification through the slot. The employee looked at the ID, then typed on her computer. Her eyes widened slightly. "Sir, this vehicle is flagged. It's registered to a police task force." "I know," Darius answered quietly. "It's mine." She made a call. Within minutes, a supervisor appeared, face pale. The Jeep was released immediately. No fees, no questions, just quiet efficiency and a muttered apology. Back at home, Darius stood in the middle of his driveway watching the neighborhood watch him. Victor approached quietly. "I guess the whole neighborhood knows now," Victor said. "Yeah," Darius answered. "They do." But while the truth was already known, the repercussions were only beginning. And the more people found out, the more the neighborhood would fracture under the weight of Marjorie's pride. By the next morning, Cypress Hill Commons was buzzing with speculation. No one wanted to admit it out loud, but everyone knew Marjorie Crowe had poked the wrong bear. The flashing lights of the task force vehicles were burned into their memory. And now the vice president of the HOA, the woman who once dictated the color of front doors and the number of ornaments in the gardens, was the subject of a police investigation. Detective Carla Vale returned that morning with 2 more investigators. This time they were not in uniform, but their presence was unmistakable. Notebooks, simple suits, the posture that told you they were there for answers. They began knocking on doors. At Gloria Lang's house, Carla sat at the dining table with a pen in hand. "Mrs. Lang, did you witness Mrs. Crowe approach Mr. Hale's vehicle?" Gloria nodded quickly. "Yes, she had those big cutters. She just walked up like it belonged to her, cut the lock, called the tow truck right there in front of us." "And she mentioned why?" Carla asked. Gloria hesitated. "She said the Jeep looked suspicious, like it didn't belong here, but we all knew it was his. We saw him drive it every day." Carla scribbled notes. "Thank you. That matches what others have said." Across the street, Victor Rourke was giving his own statement. "I told her she was going too far. She wouldn't listen. Marjorie thinks the HOA gives her police powers. She's been pushing people around for years. This time she picked the wrong fight." Victor's wife called from the kitchen, her voice carrying. She called Darius a troublemaker before he even unpacked his boxes. Said he'd lower the neighborhood standards. I think she wanted him gone from the start. The detectives looked at each other. This was no longer just about a lock. It was starting to look like a campaign. Back at Darius's house, he sat across from Agent Paul Lang, filling out official paperwork. His face was calm, but his hand pressed hard on the pen as he wrote. "Want my honest opinion?" Paul asked. "Always," Darius answered. "She should be charged. Clear case of criminal mischief and interference with law enforcement. If it were anyone else, she'd already be in cuffs." Darius leaned back in his chair. "You and I both know politics gets complicated. The district attorney will weigh her age, her record, her role in the HOA. They'll try to turn it into a misunderstanding." Paul let out a short laugh. "A misunderstanding. Cutting a steering wheel lock and towing a task force vehicle is not a misunderstanding. It's reckless." "Agreed," Darius said. "But I've been on the other side. I've seen cases fall apart because people call it abuse of power. If all she gets is a slap on the wrist, but the neighborhood finally sees her for what she is, maybe that's the real sanction." Just then the doorbell rang. Darius opened it to find Marjorie herself standing there. No visor, hair pulled back, tense, but still clutching her notebook like armor. "We need to talk," she said stiffly. Darius stepped aside, letting her enter under Paul's watchful, unhidden skepticism. Marjorie stood in the living room, her eyes flicking between the 2 men. "I realize now that I may have acted hastily," she said, "but you must understand, Mr. Hale, I was only thinking of the community." Darius's tone was measured, but his gaze was unbreakable. Thinking of the community or thinking of control? Her cheeks flushed. "You've been confrontational from the moment you moved in. You don't follow the rules. You act like they don't apply to you." Paul cut in sharply. "The rules do not give you the right to tamper with federal property. You're lucky this conversation is happening here and not in an interrogation room." Marjorie tensed, but Darius leaned forward, lowering his voice. You don't have to like me. You don't even have to respect me. But if you ever touch my property again or interfere with my work, there will be no second warning. You will leave in handcuffs. For the first time, Marjorie did not answer right away. She looked at Darius, then at Paul, and realized she was trapped. Without another word, she turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. Paul exhaled. She's nervous, but people like her don't stay quiet for long. I was right. That same evening, the HOA board called an emergency meeting at the clubhouse. Marjorie sat at the head of the table, her voice sharp with indignation. They're trying to intimidate me, she declared. They want to paint me as a criminal when all I did was enforce our rules. If we let this go, we will be surrendering our authority. But this time, the board did not join her. One member, Howard Vale, raised his hand. Marjorie, you crossed the line. You didn't just enforce a rule, you broke the law. And now we're all stuck with the consequences. Others murmured in agreement. Even those who once feared her began shifting uncomfortably in their seats, realizing the woman they had followed had become a liability. Marjorie slammed her fist on the table. I did what none of you had the courage to do, protect our community. Silence followed. No applause, no support. Only the echo of her own words coming back to her. But pride is stubborn, and Marjorie was not ready to admit defeat. And the more her neighbors pulled away, the more desperate she became to prove she was right. By midweek, Cypress Hill Commons had gone from a quiet subdivision to the lead story on the San Antonio evening news cycle. A neighbor had leaked a doorbell camera video, the one facing Darius's driveway, that captured the entire moment Marjorie Crow cut the steering wheel lock and called the tow truck. The clip hit Facebook and then the local stations. By evening, it was running with a chyron at the bottom of the screen. HOA leader accused of tampering with police vehicle. Suddenly, the story was no longer just a neighborhood dispute. It was a public scandal. Reporters camped near the subdivision entrance, thrusting microphones at anyone willing to comment. Most residents kept their heads down and walked past, but some could not resist. Gloria Lang told a reporter, "We warned her. All of us did. She wouldn't listen. Now she's dragged all of us into this mess." Victor Rourke was more direct. She went too far, thought she was untouchable. Turns out she's not. Inside her house, Marjorie sat in front of her television, horrified. She had always thrived on control, but now the narrative was no longer in her hands. Every channel replayed the moment the bolt cutters closed. Every replay made her look less like a leader and more like a criminal. That night, her phone rang non-stop. Some calls came from HOA allies telling her to keep her head high. Others from angry residents demanding she resign. One voicemail was especially blunt. Marjorie, this is Howard. You've embarrassed this board. You've embarrassed all of us. We're voting next week. Don't expect us to back you. Meanwhile, Darius kept a low profile. He was not the type who sought the spotlight, but it followed him anyway. A reporter caught him outside his driveway. Detective Hale, any comment on the vice president of your HOA interfering with your vehicle? Darius shook his head. No comment. The investigation will speak for itself. But as he turned to leave, the reporter pressed. Do you believe she did it specifically against you? He paused, looking directly at the camera. Yes, he said simply before walking into his house. Those two letters unleashed another wave of speculation. Social media lit up with debates. Some argued Marjorie's actions were based on personal prejudice. Others defended her, saying she was only trying to enforce the rules. But the general consensus was clear. She had crossed the line. By the next meeting, the HOA hall was fuller than it had ever been. Residents who had not attended in years showed up, eager to see the repercussions. Marjorie walked in, clutching her notebook against her chest, chin high in defiance. But the energy in the room was different now. There were no supportive smiles, no whispered greetings, only cold stares. Howard Vale opened the meeting. We have to address the obvious. Our vice president's actions have brought unwanted attention to this community. The police are involved. The media is involved. This is not sustainable. Marjorie stood, her voice trembling with frustration. I was protecting Cypress Hill Commons. That Jeep was a violation. I acted decisively when no one else would. From the back, Gloria shouted, You didn't protect us. You put us in danger. Now we're the laughingstock of the city. Murmurs of agreement filled the room. A resident named Alan Reed raised his hand. I've lived here for years. There were never cameras in our neighborhood until now. There were never reporters following me through the grocery store. You did this, Marjorie, not Darius." Her face flushed. "You're all turning against me over one mistake." Victor's voice cut through the air. "It wasn't a mistake. It was arrogance, and you still won't admit it." The tension rose until Howard struck the gavel. "We will hold a vote next week on Mrs. Crow's position on this board. Until then, she is suspended from all decision-making authority." Murmurs filled the room. For the first time in years, Marjorie had been stripped of her power. She slammed her notebook on the table and stormed out, furious, muttering about betrayal. Outside, a small crowd of neighbors followed, their whispers harsh. Some muttered about lawsuits. One woman shouted, "She should be arrested, not suspended." And just when the pressure could not rise any higher, another blow arrived. That evening, the local news anchor announced, "Sources confirm that the Bexar County District Attorney's Office is reviewing charges against HOA Vice President Marjorie Crow following allegations of tampering with a police task force vehicle." The neighborhood watched from their living rooms. Marjorie's jaw tightened as she realized this was no longer just a community problem. The law was beginning to close in, but Marjorie was not ready to surrender, and the more cornered she felt, the more unpredictable she would become. The announcement from the district attorney's office hit Cypress Hill Commons like thunder. For years, Marjorie Crow had been the voice that carried weight in every meeting, the hand that marked violations in red ink, the presence people feared or tolerated. Now that same voice was under review by prosecutors, and the neighborhood could feel the shift. The next morning, Marjorie woke and saw a news van parked near the subdivision entrance. She looked out her window and saw a cameraman adjusting his tripod. A flash of panic crossed her face. For the first time in years, she did not go out for her morning patrol. She stayed inside, blinds lowered, phone pressed to her ear as she called every board member one by one. "Howard, you can't let them do this to me," she pleaded. "We have to stick together. This community will fall apart if I resign." Howard's reply was cutting. "Marjorie, the community is already falling apart because of you." He hung up without waiting for her protest. By mid-afternoon, a letter from the HOA circulated to every house. It was short but forceful, effective immediately. Marjorie Crow is suspended from the board, pending the investigation. The letter needed no more words. The neighbors understood she was finished. Meanwhile, Darius sat at his kitchen table drinking coffee and scrolling through his phone. Messages arrived from colleagues across the state. Some congratulated him for keeping his cool. Others asked how he had not exploded. Darius laughed at one message from an old partner. "Bet she wishes she'd picked on the wrong guy now." Yet beneath his composure, Darius felt a frustration gnawing at him. He had not moved into this neighborhood to become the center of a scandal. He wanted peace, and peace had been taken from him before he had even settled. That evening, Gloria and Victor stopped by his porch. Gloria handed him a foil-wrapped pie, an old-fashioned gesture of solidarity. "You didn't deserve any of this," she said softly. "She made you the enemy when all you did was park your car." Darius smiled weakly. "I appreciate it, but it's not me who's paying the price anymore. She is." Victor leaned on the railing. "She still won't admit she was wrong. She's saying this is a conspiracy to take her down." Darius shook his head. "People like Marjorie never see themselves as the problem. It's always someone else's fault." While Darius found a small circle of support, Marjorie faced isolation. The friends she once considered allies avoided her calls. Neighbors crossed the street to escape her gaze. Even her closest confidant on the board, Elaine Crow, told her quietly at the clubhouse, "I can't defend you anymore. You went too far." That night, Marjorie attended what should have been a routine HOA meeting, but instead of dictating the agenda, she sat in silence at the back while Howard took control. The agenda was clear: address the crisis, reassure residents, and distance the HOA from Marjorie's actions. Howard spoke plainly. "We cannot excuse what happened. The board's role is to maintain order, not to overstep into criminal conduct. We will cooperate fully with investigators." Every eye turned to Marjorie, and for the first time she did not speak. Her notebook lay untouched at her feet. Outside, the crowd of residents was larger than usual. Anger and exhaustion mixed in their voices. One man shouted, "She should be arrested." A woman added, "She embarrassed all of us." The pressure was undeniable. Later, in her house, Marjorie looked at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Her shoulders slumped. Her face was pale. For years, she had believed her control over the HOA made her indispensable. Now, stripped of power and facing charges, she realized the truth. She had become the example to avoid. And the legal side was closing in quickly. Detective Carla Vale confirmed with Darius the next morning that the district attorney's office was evaluating 2 charges: criminal mischief and obstruction. If filed, Marjorie could face fines and possibly probation. Darius nodded. That's fair. She deserves to be held accountable like anyone else. Carla watched him. You know she'll never admit guilt. Some people just can't, Darius answered, leaning back in his chair. Maybe she doesn't have to. Maybe the consequences are bigger than her admitting anything. She's lost her power. She's lost her reputation. That's the penalty itself. As the days passed, the neighbors began to reclaim their sense of community. Children rode their bikes again. Couples walked their dogs without looking over their shoulders for Marjorie's notebook. The neighborhood felt lighter, freer. But Marjorie remained behind closed doors, blinds drawn, living in the shadow of her own downfall. And while the legal system prepared its verdict, the real judgment had already been delivered by the very people she once ruled. When the dust finally settled over Cypress Hill Commons, the story of Marjorie Crowe and Darius Hale was more than just neighborhood gossip. It was a parable that unfolded in real time about pride, power, and the consequences of letting both run unchecked. Weeks after the incident, the district attorney's office formally announced that Marjorie would not face prison time but would be cited for criminal mischief and obstruction, both misdemeanors. She was fined, ordered to pay restitution for the damages, and required to complete community service hours. For someone who had walked the neighborhood as if she were a legislator, the punishment was humiliating. She went from handing out violations to wearing a fluorescent vest, picking up trash along the roadside under the watchful eyes of county supervisors. Neighbors whispered when they passed her on their drives. Some felt pity, others felt vindication. Most simply felt relief. The tyrant of Cypress Hill Commons had finally been disarmed. For Darius, life began to return to something resembling normal. His Jeep sat proudly in the driveway again, the steering wheel locked in place. No one complained now, no one dared. When he walked his dog in the evenings, people greeted him again, this time with genuine warmth instead of nervous glances. One Saturday, Victor and Gloria joined Darius on his porch. They drank iced tea, enjoying the quiet. Gloria spoke first. It's different now. Lighter. Almost like everyone realized they don't have to be afraid anymore. Darius nodded. That's what happens when people stop letting fear dictate their decisions. For too long, everyone let one person's voice control them all. It only took one mistake to show how fragile that control really was. Victor laughed. You'd think she'd apologize, but I doubt that day will ever come. Darius leaned back, his gaze steady. Some people never say they're sorry, and maybe that's okay. The point isn't to wait for her apology. It's to learn from what they did. Pride can make someone believe they're above consequences, but pride doesn't erase responsibility. The three of them sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words settling over them. Across the street, Marjorie's house remained dark, blinds closed as usual. She rarely came out anymore. The neighborhood had moved on, but she was trapped in the wreckage of her own decisions. The lesson did not go unnoticed by anyone. Parents used it as a teaching point for their children. Don't let arrogance cost you friendships. Couples reminded each other not to let small conflicts spiral out of control. And for Darius, it was a reminder that authority, whether in a badge, a title, or a notebook, means nothing if it is not grounded in respect. Later, new elections were held for the HOA. Howard Vale was elected president, and the board promised a new direction focused on cooperation rather than punishment. As Darius listened to the speeches, he realized the neighborhood had regained its balance. They were not perfect, but they were free of the shadow of one person's obsession with control. That evening, on his porch, Darius thought about all the cases he had worked as a detective: drug seizures, meth wars, gangs, undercover operations. None of them had prepared him for the strange reality of facing an HOA leader with bolt cutters. Yet somehow this experience was as revealing as any case file. It showed him how small acts of arrogance can become disasters, and how resilience, not retaliation, is often the most powerful weapon. Looking into the camera of a reporter who later asked for final comments, Darius kept it simple. What happened here isn't just about me or one neighbor. It's about remembering that power doesn't give you the right to trample others. Respect does. If you don't have that, you've already lost. And that was the conclusion, not only for Cypress Hill Commons, but for anyone listening now. The question is simple. How often do we let pride guide our decisions? And what would it cost us if we let it go too far? So if this story left you with something to think about, remember, power fades, but the lessons remain.